All right, chapter 9. We made it. The last chapter. We get a Gatsby funeral. We get Daisy's reaction. We get Nick's reaction, and so on. Nick tells us after 2 years he can remember the rest of that day and the night and the next day. There's police, there's photographers coming to try to get the story of what happened to Gatsby. Myrtle's sister, Catherine, swears that her sister has never seen Gatsby, that her sister was completely happy with her husband, and she had not been into any mischief whatsoever. And basically, they say that Wilson was a deranged person, and that is why he killed Gatsby and then himself. Nick says he found himself on Gatsby's side and alone. And then he realizes that no one's coming to see Gatsby, and he says, hour upon hour it grew upon me that I was responsible because no one else was interested. Interested, I mean, with that intense personal interest to which everyone has some vague right at the end. No one's interested in making arrangements for Gatsby's funeral. No one's interested in coming to a funeral or really interested in coming to see him. Nick is the only person there, and he feels responsible for getting people to come to Gatsby's funeral. He says, I called up Daisy half an hour after we found him. Called her instinctively and without hesitation. But she and Tom had gone away early that afternoon and taken baggage with them. He says, left no address? No. Say when they'd be back? No. Any idea where they are? How I could reach them? I don't know. Can't say. So basically, Daisy and Tom have moved. They have ran away from this whole ordeal. And Nick still wants to get somebody for him. And he says, I'll get somebody for you, Gatsby. Don't worry. Just trust me. I'll get somebody for you. He wants to get Meyer Wolfsheim, but can't figure out how to get in touch with him. He calls a couple other people who basically say no. He sends a letter to Wolfsheim, which asks for information, wanting him to come on the next train. Still, no one shows up except more police and photographers and newspaper people. Wolfsheim does send a letter that says, Dear Mr. Carraway, this has been one of the most terrible shocks of my life. To me, I hardly can believe it that it is true at all. Such a mad act as that man did should make us all think. I cannot come down now, as I am tied up in some very important business and cannot get mixed up in this thing now. If there is anything I can do a little later, let me know in a letter by Edgar. I hardly know where I am when I hear about a thing like this and am completely knocked down and out. Yours truly, Meyer Wolfsheim. And then hasty addenda beneath. Let me know about the funeral, etc. Do not know his family at all. So basically, Meyer Wolfsheim is washing his hands clean of this. Probably because this was a business connection for him. He's part of bootlegging and other illegal activities, so he can't really be around too much when there's police officers and reporters and deaths involved. So Nick goes on and tries to find more people. And then it says, on the third day, a telegram signed Henry C. Gatz arrived from a town in Minnesota. It said only that the sender was leaving immediately and to postpone the funeral until it came. It was Gatsby's father. So Gatsby's father is now coming to the funeral. Again, Gatsby told people his parents were dead. So his father has now emerged. He is a very elderly man. He says he saw it in the Chicago newspaper. Nick says he didn't know how to reach him, and then they go on a little bit. Nick's asked if he wants to take the body west to bury it there, and he says no. Jimmy, apparently a nickname, always liked it better down east. He rose up to his position in the east. Were you a friend of my boys? And then they have some more conversation. Somebody calls and wants their shoes back from a party. Nick says the funeral's tomorrow. Tell anybody. And the guy basically says he's not coming still. Now, Nick feels shame for Gatsby because no one wants to show up for him. They showed up every weekend for his huge parties and took advantage of that. But now that he's dead, they don't want any part of it. So Nick, the day of the funeral, goes to visit Meyer Wolfsheim in New York, and he has a little trouble getting in to see him. And then he finally gets to talk to Wolfsheim. He asked Wolfsheim, "Did you start him in business?" "Start him? I made him. I raised him up out of nothing, right out of the gutter." So basically, Wolfsheim raised up Gatsby in this world of making money through illegal activities. And that is how Gatsby made his money. And then Wolfsheim says he can't do it. He can't go to the funeral. He can't get mixed up in it. Probably be to save his own self. Okay, and then we continue on. He goes back to Gatsby's house. Gatsby's dad shows him a picture that Gatsby sent him. We also find out that Gatsby visited him 2 years ago and bought him a house to live in. He seems very proud of Gatsby as well. He's looking at everything in Gatsby's house and he's amazed. He's so impressed with his son. And then he brings out this children's book called Hopalong Cassidy. And he wrote in this book, Gatsby wrote in the book when he was a boy, and he put a schedule. And the schedule is dated September 12th, 1906. And here's his schedule. Rise from bed, 6 a.m. Dumbbell exercise and wall scaling, 6:15 to 6:30. And it goes on like this. And then he has some general resolves. No wasting time at Shafter's house. No more smoking or chewing. Bath every other day. Read one improving book or magazine per week. Save $5, crossed out, $3 per week. Be better to parents. And his dad is very proud of this because he says it just shows you how determined he was. And this shows us how determined Gatsby is to be better, to seem more refined. Okay. Then it is time for the funeral to start, and they kind of wait around for people to show up, and no one shows up, and then they go to graveside, which is kind of sad. It's a little drizzly. And then also who shows up is Allies from the library, the guy with the big glasses who was impressed with the real books. And he says he couldn't get to the house. Nick says neither could anybody else. And Allies is shocked. He said, "Why, my God, they used to go there by the hundreds." So he is appalled that no one is showing up to Gatsby's funeral as well. Okay. After the funeral, Nick has this memory of coming home back west from prep school or college at Christmas time and riding on the train and seeing the western snow and the hills and the countryside. He says, "That's my Middle West, not the wheat or the prairies or the lost Swede towns, but the thrilling returning trains of my youth and the street lamps and the sleigh bells and the frosty dark and the shadows of holly wreaths thrown by lighted windows on the snow." So he's starting to miss the Middle West. He even mentions that it seems that Tom and Gatsby, Daisy, Jordan, and himself did not fit in New York in the East because they are Westerners. And he says, even when the East excited me most, even when I was most keenly aware of it, he says, even then it had always for me a quality of distortion. West Egg especially still figures in my more fantastic dreams. And then he compares New York to this scene by El Greco, a painting. 100 houses, at once conventional and grotesque, crouching under a sullen, overhanging sky and a lustreless moon. In the foreground, 4 solemn men in dress suits are walking along the sidewalk with a stretcher on which lies a drunken woman in a white evening dress. Her hand, which dangles over the side, sparkles cold with jewels. Gravely, the men turn in at a house, the wrong house, but no one knows the woman's name and no one cares. So basically he's saying the East is this place with all these people, but no one cares who you are. No one cares what your name is. No one knows what your name is, which is very different from the towns of the West, where people are more involved with each other. And he says, after Gatsby's death, the East was haunted for me. And he decides that he is going to leave and go back west. Before that, though, he does break things off with Jordan Baker officially. And they go on, and Jordan Baker kind of insults him and calls him careless. And then, before he leaves New York, one day he sees Tom. And they kind of see each other, and Tom says, "What's the matter? Do you object to shaking hands with me?" And Nick says, "Yes." So Tom continues on, and Nick asks him what he told Wilson. And he says, "I told him the truth. He came to the door while we were getting ready to leave, and when I sent down word that we weren't in, he tried to force his way upstairs. He was crazy enough to kill me if I hadn't told him who owned the car. His hand was on a revolver in his pocket every minute he was in the house. What if I did tell him? The fellow had it coming to him. He threw dust into our eyes just like he did in Daisy's, but he was a tough one. He ran over Myrtle like he'd run over a dog and then never stopped his car." Now remember, Daisy is actually the one who ran over Myrtle. So Daisy is letting Gatsby take the fall for this. Daisy is watching Tom tell a guy with a gun that Gatsby ran over Myrtle and where to find him, and she's not saying anything. And then Nick has a resolve. It was all very careless and confused. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then returned back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together, and let other people clean up the mess they had made. So he has resolved that they are careless and let other people clean up their messes, and when they make a mess, they just run away to a new place. So Daisy officially is not leaving Tom, if you haven't figured that out yet. So before he leaves, he kind of goes one last time over to Gatsby's house. And he says, "I went over and looked at the huge, incoherent failure of a house once more." The house being a failure because the point of the house was to get Daisy. And not only did he not get Daisy, but he died on behalf of Daisy, basically, instead. Then he goes down to the beach. And as he looks out into the ocean, until gradually I became aware of the old island here, Ellis Island, that flowered once for Dutch sailors' eyes, a fresh green breast of the new world. So he's imagining immigrants coming over and seeing Ellis Island for the first time and the hope that they would have in the American dream and being able to make anything of themselves. And he says, just for a moment, this seemed like the greatest of all human dreams. For a moment, they must have held their breath in the presence of this continent. Face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. So we are now connecting New York with the American dream and whether or not it is attainable. And it seems that it is the most exciting and the most attainable when you see it from afar. Sailing into Ellis Island, you see the hope of the huge city, the green light across the bay on the dock. It is compelling. That is the dream, to get to that. It says Gatsby believed in the green light, the American dream, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us, meaning kind of goes away. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther. So basically he's saying we will constantly try to reach for the American dream that is slowly running away from us. So we beat on, boats against the current. So if you're rowing a boat against the current, you're basically going nowhere. Borne back ceaselessly or endlessly into the past. So basically we end with this notion that the dream is not attainable. We work so hard to get to this dream, but just like Gatsby, we die without ever getting to the dream or being disappointed because the dream was bigger than reality, or people are so busy dreaming that they forget to live in reality. So if we go back to the American dream, basically F. Scott Fitzgerald, no matter how much money someone has, the dream is still never fully attainable. It keeps receding, going back. And we keep going toward it and rowing and working hard against that current only to be pushed back away from the dream. And that is The Great Gatsby.